All right, thank you everyone for being here. Quickly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Karen Sentoff with VHB. We are the consultant team that was hired to help the town take a closer look at the downtown area and really start to assess some of the needs for particularly better sort of walking, biking, multimodal connectivity in the downtown area and really think about how to progress some projects forward to help with those community connections, particularly focused along Mill Street and Main Street in downtown Hardwick. So appreciate you all being here this evening. This is sort of wrapping up our process here. This is our final public meeting, and we'll get into some detail of what we're going to cover with this evening's conversation, but really wanted to come back and get with the community. I know a lot of you have been part of the process from the start here, but wanted to get back with the community and talk about our recommendations that are coming out of sort of the back end of the process and just spell out some of the next steps for how to progress some of these recommendations forward. Yes?
Could I ask you to share with us how this fits into whatever's going to happen downtown? And maybe somebody from the town needs to tell us what happens after this meeting?
Certainly. So we can illuminate a little bit of that, and then maybe we can have a bigger conversation as part of the discussion with sort of how that fits in some of the broader goals and things that the town has going on.
It would be helpful, I think, for us to have the context of what might come from this, because this isn't about budgeting for a project. This is about options, right?
Yeah, and our process is really, looking at all the different options and weighing them and getting, community input and feedback on those options. And then making some recommendations, but the way that we have set out the draft report and sort of what we're calling a phased implementation plan, the idea is that the town can then take up the pieces of that implementation plan and determine, when they're ready to approve for funding to sort of progress those pieces forward. So we'll get to some of those details of what that might look like. All right, so high-level agenda. We are going to just go over at the front end here an overview and a little bit of background. I know there's a couple of fresh faces in the group here this evening, so we'll talk just a little bit about sort of why we were asked to be involved in this process and sort of the nuts and bolts of the process. We'll talk about the purpose and need, which is sort of the driving principle for the work that we're doing, and sort of the principle that we're weighing all the different options against, and then we'll talk about the different options we were sort of evaluating and sum up that evaluation, and then talk about ultimately our preferred alternative and recommendations coming out of this process, and some of the refinements that we've made based on some of the input that we heard in the last conversation and in the time since we were last all together, and then open it up for some discussion. So project team, just highlighting, appreciate all of the collaboration with the town here. Kristen has spearheaded this effort. Tracy's been involved at every step, and David has also helped out with this process and vetting all of our options. I'm accompanied this evening by Joe Vanacore from my team, who has done a lot of the work and design work that has supported this, and then certainly want to get this draft scoping report that's just about wrapped up in front of the state agency too, and just make sure that there's no fatal flaws and they've got buy-in for this section of roadway, which is state highway but a class 1 town highway. So there's sort of that dual ownership that we need to consider. So just to give you an overview of where we've been, we were with the community back in July, just to talk about sort of the concerns for the project area and some of the issues that folks were experiencing, and really dig into some of the existing conditions a little bit deeper with the community. And then we went back to the drawing board and really tried to figure out what were the alternatives that we were going to use to address those needs that we identified in that first conversation and sort of the existing conditions work that we had done ahead of that. We were back with the community in November to talk about those different options and talk about the evaluation to that point, and heard a lot of input and feedback on where we wanted to head with a preferred alternative, and a number of refinements to that preferred alternative. So here we are today, talking about that sort of option that we want to carry forward, and then hopefully at the end of the month, advancing that to the select board for approval and hopefully establishing sort of the baseline for that process to move forward and start to find funding and work towards design and construction of some of these improvements. So just a little bit of background and sort of to orient you to the scope of this effort. We're really focused on Mill Street, essentially from the town parcel that's sort of at the east end of the study area here, and then all the way along Mill Street through the Glenside Avenue intersection and over to the intersection with Main Street, and then a small segment of South Main Street, basically to where the pedestrian bridge connection will be with that improvement project. So really focusing on the core downtown area here, and like I said, thinking about some of the desire lines and future connections to some of the recreational opportunities with the LVRT, and certainly thinking about some of the disconnectivity of the existing pedestrian network and sort of multimodal ways of getting around sort of the downtown core area. So after we conducted an existing conditions assessment and talked with the community about their sort of concerns and some of the issues that folks were experiencing, we went back and worked on developing a purpose and needs statement. And so the purpose of the study was really to create a safe, comfortable environment in the village core, and clear transition zone to the core area, improve connectivity of the pedestrian network to support access to community destinations, including businesses and recreational opportunities, and then improve the multimodal transportation connectivity and infrastructure. And the project need, there were a few needs that sort of emerged from some of those conversations in the existing condition. Certainly the lack of an effective transition zone, so really that traffic calming, that transition between the high-speed rural highway and the village center, non-contiguous pedestrian network, capacity to handle increased multimodal activity, particularly thinking about sort of the engagement with the LVRT and the connection there, and then additional infrastructure deficiencies that were noted, including vehicle turning movements through some of the intersections, missing or inadequate crosswalks, impaired stormwater systems, so some other elements of the roadway environment that we were focusing in on and thinking about how we can improve those things to improve the experience of everyone using this corridor. So with the next couple of slides, I'm going to step through the alternatives that we had looked at and had some in-depth conversations about at the last meeting with the community here. And so I'll step through those sort of at a high level, but we do have other slides that we can turn on if we need to dig into any of the details or if anyone has any clarifying questions on any of those alternatives. They are quite small on the screen here, but I'll try to highlight sort of the key elements. 2 times, but quite small. So I'll try to just highlight some of the key elements with each of the alternatives. So alternative 1, we were calling the baseline treatments alternative. This is really sort of the core pieces that we thought we needed to establish to address some of the core needs that we identified as part of that first part of the process. So just noting here and sort of orienting folks to what we're looking at. Over here is where the pedestrian bridge connection will be. Over here on sort of page right is the town parcel that's part of the FEMA buyback process here. And so we're really focused in on sort of the corridor that you see highlighted between those 2 points, including the intersection of Main Street and Mill Street. And so sort of moving page left to page right, we're looking at, delineating the sidewalk, particularly in front of Mike's, where there'll be a flush sidewalk to sort of make sure folks know where they should be when they're walking through the space. Establishing some bulb outs around the Mill Street, Main Street intersection, really again to delineate that space and make sure as vehicles and pedestrians are moving through that space, they understand where they should be. Some additional sidewalk connections where the sidewalk is just, in terms of its condition, is sort of past its useful life and needs some improvement. Reestablishing those crosswalks that are existing at that intersection, and then really hardening the sidewalk along the north side of the corridor along Mill Street. So really establishing that, again, delineated space where folks understand they should be walking and sort of, curb separated from the traffic where it can be, including a flush sidewalk through the gas station, the mobile station, sort of towards the end of the corridor. It also, establishes more of a curb sidewalk in front of the public parking on the far side, and just, makes some improvements to some of the crossings and access points to that facility. Another recommendation, sort of working our way towards the Glenside Avenue intersection and understanding some of the challenges with that intersection, really just trying to do some of the vegetation clearing that is needed to help with those sight lines at that location, but sort of a minimal treatment option. Yep.
So is this the extent of the area you're focused on?
This is generally the extent of the area that we were focused on. We do sort of extend out a little bit with some of the recommendations, particularly later on you'll see around parking wayfinding, some of the transition zone treatments, that sort of thing. But yeah, this is sort of the core area and scope of the project. So quickly I'll step through. Alternative 2 has essentially all the same elements that you saw in Alternative 1, our baseline treatment option, but this one is sort of moderate treatments, so it's making some other improvements on top of sort of those alternatives or those options. So a couple of things to note here. The addition of another crossing across the North Main Street sort of approach to the Mill Street Main Street intersection. We saw plenty of people making that crossing, even though there's not a crosswalk there and there's not really curb ramps established to be able to make that crossing. So it's certainly a desire line for folks to be making that connection. So establishing that crossing for those folks at the intersection. And then, like we had in the first alternative, establishing that north side crosswalk or that north side sidewalk. But with this option, again, trying to mirror some of that on the south side. And so a couple of additional things to note with this option. At the post office, addressing one of the concerns we heard early in the process with some of the sight lines at that driveway, so actually flip-flopping where the driveway access is at that parcel and carrying through that sort of flush sidewalk through that driveway. And then again, establishing the curb sidewalk on the south side where the public parking is, but then trying to carry some of that curb treatment along the south side, again, just to sort of delineate and channelize folks and squeeze folks down as they're coming into the village, particularly as a driver, giving that sort of visual cue that it's a constrained environment, you should slow down, you should expect to see pedestrians and other users of the roadway. The other sort of component to this one that's a little bit different than the first alternative was focused in on the Glenside Avenue intersection and just realigning that intersection, taking away sort of the triangle treatment that's there today, and sort of teeing in the intersection, again, with vegetation clearing, and trying to improve the sight lines at that location, and just sort of simplifying some of the complexity at that intersection for drivers. And then finally, with the third alternative, sort of the more comprehensive treatment option here, it layers in, again, a couple of more treatments to carry through some of the needs that we wanted to address with one of the alternatives. So again, all of the same things you saw in the previous alternative, but then it layered in, really establishing and hardening a sidewalk connection on the south side. And so with that, it contemplated closing Sumner Street so that we could actually establish a crosswalk that meets, or a sidewalk connection that meets our cross slope requirements for an accessible sidewalk and pedestrian network connection on the south side. And then, a curb sidewalk all the way through to close to where the Glenside Avenue intersection is today. Another sort of component of this alternative that was contemplated and discussed in the last meeting was really doing a full realignment of the Glenside Avenue intersection. So really the crux of this component is that we'd realign that intersection to come into Mill Street at sort of the crest of the existing hill along Mill Street. So really realigning that intersection to create the best sight lines for folks coming off of Glenside Avenue, and really cutting into the slope where we were doing the vegetation clearing in the previous alternatives to create that connection and really establish some better sight lines and visibility of that intersection, really daylighting that intersection for folks on every approach. Finally, sort of the last major piece of this alternative was contemplating a pedestrian connection into the town parcel at sort of the eastern end of the project area. And this is really thinking about, the future use of that parcel that will probably be used, some for flood mitigation and floodplain reestablishment, but then could also be used for recreational or green space purposes in the future. And so contemplating sort of what it would look like to potentially connect to those resources and connect them to the pedestrian network in the downtown so they're accessible to folks. So last time we were with the community, we talked about those three alternatives and the evaluation that was associated with those. We don't go into the level of detail we did last time, but just to highlight a couple of things here in terms of the sort of evaluation. As you noticed, we sort of layered on a number of options and sort of components in each of those alternatives. So with that, it progressively gets more expensive. There are costs associated with each of those components to the plan. But what we sort of did on the back end, and you'll see in a couple of slides, is that we start to parse those out into projects that could be implemented in sort of a phased approach. So it would be, a small project here, small project there, as opposed to one big sort of lump sum to find funding to be able to do that. But if you contemplate all of the sort of comprehensive treatment alternative 3, we're talking about somewhere in the range of $1.2 million. And then, a slew of other things that we evaluate as part of this, the traffic operations and improvements there, which generally improvements across the board, the safety improvements, whether it satisfies that purpose and needs statement at the top end of the program here, the utility impacts that we'd need to consider, which as we add on more components and we're moving intersection alignments, there's certainly more impacts to utilities in that case. Right-of-way impacts, which again, with the Glenside Avenue intersection realignment, that's really where we get into right-of-way impacts, and that parcel on the corner would definitely see some impacts to be able to do that realignment. And then resource impacts, we're generally working, within sort of the built environment space and roadway environment space with any of these options. But again, with that realignment at the intersection, there'd certainly be some impacts and implications for that. All right, so a couple of things that we really heard at the last meeting, and some of the key takeaways that we took away from that conversation included, we definitely wanted to see the corridor sidewalk treatments, establishing, if we could, the sort of pedestrian treatments on both the north and south side of Mill Street, and the pedestrian, establishing and hardening to the degree that we can the pedestrian crossings along the corridor, and implementing the gateway treatments, which I didn't talk about too much in the alternatives, but we'll talk a little bit more in the refined preferred alternative. One of the things that we also heard is the dead ending of Summer Street. Although we talked about some other options to sort of mitigate that and potentially dead end Sumner Street, but connect that corridor sort of up the hill a little bit behind the post office parcel, and there's a lot of ideas about sort of the vision for what that could be. We decided it was sort of outside of the scope of what we really wanted to accomplish with this project, but definitely noting that there may be some opportunities in the future, again, to make that sort of connection on the south side of Mill Street, really have a cross slope that works for an accessible crossing at the Sumner Street intersection by potentially in some future phase dead-ending that road and making the connection elsewhere. But we were sort of hearing that we couldn't do that without making that connection elsewhere upslope. So sort of tabled that for this preferred alternative. Certainly heard the strong desire not to lose any parking downtown and to increase the utility of the parking that we do have. So really thinking about how we could address that with some refinements to the alternatives. And then long-term phasing was favored for the Glenside Avenue intersection. So sort of that getting into that mentality of a phased approach where let's do the sort of pedestrian treatments and address those needs, and then think about, what can we do to that intersection to really make that a safer intersection for everyone. We did hear too that, we don't want to stop short of the Glenside Avenue intersection. If we're going to improve that intersection, let's also make a pedestrian connection for those folks that are up the hill and want to access the pedestrian network downtown. So definitely heard that loud and clear. And then just, the request to dig in a little bit more on some of the crosswalk treatments that make sense, and we should be pulling forward some of the parking options to increase that utility of existing parking, and some of the traffic calming elements to think about at that gateway and transition zone. So lots of great conversation, lots of great input, and definitely tried to pull that all away from that conversation and think about how we could refine the preferred alternative to address some of those additional components that we heard from the conversation. So the refinements that we ended up pulling forward, we decided not to dead end Sumner Street. We did find one new parking spot close to the laundromat, so we shifted the sidewalk alignment a little bit to get in one more parking spot, because we recognized that losing that parking spot where the bulb out would be was a tough thing. So trying to find one new spot in that area, sort of adjacent to the laundromat. The sidewalk connection up to Glenside Avenue we included, and then recommendations for parking wayfinding, recommendations for more visible crosswalk treatments, and then some additional traffic calming elements for that gateway zone. So what you're seeing on the screen is the sort of comprehensive sort of 10,000 foot view of the preferred alternative. So many of the things that you saw in Alternative 3 appear here. Again, really establishing the sidewalk along sort of South Main Street, the bulb outs at the intersection of Main Street and Mill Street, the additional crosswalk across the north side of that intersection, and then really establishing and hardening the sidewalk connections along both the north and south side of Mill Street. The additional sort of connection up to Glenside Avenue on the sidewalk would be included as part of the sort of longer term project to realign that intersection. And then, including the long-term pedestrian path over to the town parcel, but contemplating that as sort of a longer-term component. So we'll zoom in and just look at a little bit finer detail and a little bit bigger on your screen here for some of those treatments, just to get some familiarity. So we're a little shifted from the previous sort of orientation. So here's the pedestrian bridge and existing sidewalk. A couple of additional things to note here in the preferred alternative. Recognizing there's some bike landing opportunities, especially with more traffic from the LVRT, sort of finding places to have some bike parking established in downtown. So recognizing either at sort of the landing above the pedestrian bridge or at the park here at sort of the street grade, establishing some bike parking options at those locations to sort of have an intercept for folks that want to be in the downtown. Again, at the intersection, really contemplating some bulb outs to take up that extra space at the intersection and delineate the space for turning movements. We did see some, it's certainly a complex intersection, and we did see, folks sort of passing on the right to make the turn around someone. The bulb outs on the far side really limit the ability for folks to pass on the right on the other side when someone's making the left, but really sort of drawing in the edges of that intersection and making sure people know where they should be and sort of limiting where they can be at that intersection. That also sort of effectively shortens our crossings for our pedestrians, so really trying to make the space pretty friendly and approachable for folks on foot. I'm just going to highlight here, this is the sort of spot that we had some conversation about the last time we were all together, that sort of last parking space that is utilized as a parking space right now. So recognizing that there's sort of an effective loss of a space there, but as we move along the corridor, you'll see we were able to find a spot to gain that spot back. A couple of other notes here. We did hear that there was a need for truck unloading space, so maintaining this space in front of Mike's for truck loading and unloading, and just recognizing that that's going to need to be striped appropriately.
Well, while you're on this slide still, I know you said that's not the focus area on the left side of town if you're looking at this photo, but most people within walking distance live to the south or the west. Mm-hmm. And there's no safe crossing for any of those residents right now. The town just took out a crosswalk. I'm just wondering why that area wasn't considered downtown to me. And again, I'm not trying to sound cynical by any means, but that's the most dangerous intersection, I think. Yeah,
and absolutely recognize the complexity that comes with the way that intersection is controlled for traffic, the fact that there's sort of a lack of pedestrian access on that intersection. For this project, it's just outside of sort of the limits of our project, but it sounds like Tracy has something to add.
This is not meant to be the end-all and be-all of traffic planning. It's just a first phase. And actually, when the grant was first being considered, it was only going to be Mill Street, because that's like the street that has like no sidewalks right now. Yeah. And there was a little bit of mission creep even coming on to South Main. But we understand there needs to be additional work done. This is just the first bite of the apple with this one study. But
Yeah, anecdotally, having worked right where the old co-op was, no one ever used that pedestrian bridge, by the way. It's not how people are coming to the town from the residential areas. It's an awesome bridge, don't get me wrong, we'd love to take breaks and go there, but I would see more need to fix this end of town than fix Glen's side. In terms of pedestrian access, it's a very dangerous intersection. I'm surprised we don't have more car accidents there, but I think far more people are walking and biking from this other end of town.
Yeah.
You know,
So now that we've been through this process with that street, we can just do it again. Yeah.
Pick up where we left off here, right? This end of the corridor. No, but great point raised, and recognizing that, you know, establishing these connections is going to hopefully increase that demand for some of these other parts of town that do need to be addressed. So appreciate that thought. Just one more note that I'm seeing here on the screen that is worth daylighting is the parking wayfinding signage. You know, we were noting on the way in the sort of lack of parking wayfinding, especially if you're coming in from 14 sort of at this end of the town. There is some parking signage to go up North Main Street, but not direct you to the public parking along Mill Street. So definitely some need there, and we'll talk a little bit about you know, that sort of parking wayfinding recommendation on the back end. But recognizing there are some places that should be highlighted to let folks know where those opportunities exist. That's not just, you know, on the street. All right, zooming in here on the Mill Street Main Street intersection. Just to highlight for folks the sort of change in color here, the red is meant to be mountable treatment, so you know the trucks will still be able to get through there, but vehicles will really not want to make that movement. We sort of used a beveled curb and a sort of raised section, so again, trucks will be able to sort of track over that and make the turns that they need to at that intersection, but for passenger cars, they're typically not going to want to go over the curb to make those movements. So it really effectively takes up that space so that vehicles know where they should be in the intersection. And again, has that added benefit of sort of shortening the pedestrian crossings, establishing that crossing on the north side of the intersection where that desire line is. We would modify the parking layout a little bit here, just to get those spaces in there and establish an accessible parking space. Certainly all of the signage for the pedestrian crossings and shifting the alignment slightly on this segment of North Main Street, just trying to tee in that approach and make it more clear where folks need to be.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Certainly.
On the north side of North Main Street at the laundromat, what's the purpose of that bump out there where there was once a parking space before the realignment of Route 15 through town?
Sure, great question. So actually what you're seeing in the background here is the...
I'm talking about on the north side, once you turn.
North Main Street side.
That right there,
Oh,
that's
right
not
here.
keeping anyone.
This spot.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so a couple of things there to be thinking about. I'll say for this side and for that side as well. Really, the letter of the law says that we need 20 feet between parking and a crossing in the state of Vermont, and so we're really trying to establish that buffer space for those parking spaces to be outside of that 20-foot buffer. And really what that's about is making sure that those pedestrians are visible and they're not blocked by a parked car close to the crossing.
Does that show the current bump out on the other side of the road across from the laundromat?
The bump outs are shown just like a gray outline here. Yep. So those are the existing.
Just putting a note out there that one in front of the inn, people are going to blow their tires on that unless it's made to be driven over. Like,
Yeah,
they had
yeah.
to redesign the rotary in Hyde Park because it kept blowing out tractor trailer tires. If somebody comes down that hill with a trailer,
Yeah.
they're gonna either drive into oncoming traffic to make it around that turn, or they're gonna have to drive on top of it. I mean, if that's roughly to scale.
Yeah.
So just, that's.
Yeah, and
you
this
can't
is,
make it like the other bump outs in town right now. It's like a.
yeah,
you know,
these are
it's
more
just-
of a curbed bump out with quite a bit of reveal. These would be essentially like the mountable, a little less egregious than the mountable section in the middle of a roundabout, right? So where the tractor trailers are tracking now. Yeah, so it'd be an angled curb and then, you know, a paver treatment on the top that it feels uncomfortable for a car to be on it, but the tractor trailers will be able to roll right over it. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving forward, but we can definitely double back if folks have additional questions. So as we move along the corridor here, just recognizing, again, on the north side, we did shift the alignment of the sidewalk to be able to establish one more parallel parking spot on the north side there, and then we shift back to neck in and make that crossing over to the post office pretty short. And then, again, establishing the sidewalk along the north side, and then once we're in the public parking sort of area on the south side, establishing that sidewalk along the south side. The thing that you're not seeing, obviously, here is the dead ending of Sumner Street, and it's really, we're focused in on that cross slope. You know, Sumner Street comes in at a really steep angle, and technically, based on the standards that we need to meet, for an accessible crossing, you know, that steep slope just doesn't meet the bill. So although there will be a sidewalk and then a gap and then a sidewalk, folks will walk on that side. But really, to meet the spirit of what we need to achieve for an accessible crossing, we will have the accessible crossing here at the post office and then establish another accessible crossing on the far side. So if folks really do need this sort of accessible route, that'll be available to folks on both sides of the road to be able to make that connection. Certainly, parking wayfinding, recognizing that opportunity for the public parking. This preferred alternative does include that shift to the post office driveway to help with that sight line, and then, you know, contemplates that sidewalk treatment on both sides, flush through the driveways and flush through the access to the mobile parcel there on the north side.
And then would parking at the post office be on the haircut side?
Yeah, so it would flip-flop how the parking is on the interior circulation. We just, you know, not including that as part of
What do you
this.
see flip-flop?
So our sidewalk, our curb sidewalk would come through this section, which is right now the driveway. And then the driveway would be where the current parking is, and so your nose-in parking spaces would end up likely on this side of that driveway to be able to make that change.
Does that affect, never mind, that will affect their parking in the back of that lot?
Yes, which they seemed like that was the preferred approach. They want to change the sort of site circulation for that location.
She's going to need permission from the post office, the USPS to do so.
Oh, yeah.
And she's actually,
That would be a really helpful change.
yeah.
And then here at the sort of eastern end of the corridor, just a couple more things to highlight. So certainly contemplating in the long term that realignment of the Glenside Avenue intersection. And again, that really establishes the intersection point with Mill Street at sort of the crest of the hill. So really creating that best sight line that we can for folks that are coming off of that roadway. And then just recognizing that, you know, that does mean some right-of-way impacts for that parcel on the corner, and certainly some significant regrading that would have to occur with that. Again, long-term vision here, including that pedestrian path into the town parcel and trying to establish that connection for whatever the future use of that area will be. And then just recognizing a number of sort of gateway components that we wanted to pull forward, really to establish that transition zone and really get folks to slow down sooner as they're coming into the village from sort of rural high-speed highway zone. So a couple of things that we're recommending here, transverse line markings, which I will show you an example of what that actually looks like, but those would be as you come into the curve here, and certainly want to coordinate with VTrans on that, since the line in the sand is somewhere around here of where it transitions to Class 1 town highway. Establish a welcome sign that gives you, again, that sort of visual cue that you're coming to a place, time to pay attention and slow down and think about how you're operating your vehicle. And then, the other suggestion here is planting a tree line, if possible, along sort of the edge of that parcel. It, again, just has that sort of visual cue for folks that now, there's an established thing that you're coming into, so to start paying attention. And then another recommendation is to take the existing radar speed feedback sign and move it to sort of this side of the curve and really, again, give that visual cue for folks to slow down and start paying attention to how they're operating their vehicle. Catch them before they get to the Glenside Avenue intersection to slow down and get that feedback on how fast they're going. There's a couple of things to be thinking about with that, but we'll get into some more detail in the next couple of slides on some of those considerations. And then this is just a zoom in at the Glenside Avenue intersection and a couple of additional elements that we wanted to pull forward as part of that conversation. Certainly this will take regrading, reprofiling, and we'll want to meet sort of, again, the crest of the hill that is in the existing curve there. What this realignment does, a couple of things. Certainly there's going to be a cut slope and a need for a retaining wall, but it establishes the intersection really to create those great sight lines in both directions. It does create an opportunity for potentially some stormwater treatment, especially coming off of that hillside, an opportunity to catch some of that stormwater and handle it there instead of further down the system. So really an opportunity for that treatment. And then what we heard loud and clear in the last conversation is trying to create that connection up to that neighborhood and making sure that the folks that are in the neighborhood of sort of Glenside Avenue, Sumner Street, and further afield have a place to sort of get into the pedestrian network up the hill a little bit. So really trying to make that connection along sort of the existing edge of roadway. So sort of edge of roadway is essentially edge of what you're seeing here for that sidewalk. And there are some features in here to consider. There's an old retaining wall that is historic through that section. So things we'll want to maintain as part of that project.
That's going to take a lot more work on Glenside because it's hardly walkable given how narrow it is.
Yeah, I don't see people walking down from one side.
Absolutely.
Not often.
No, it's too steep.
I don't think there's
I've seen a couple people
anything
walking
else
down.
on.
I watched it.
I used to go do
All right, so just focusing in on a few more of the recommendations and treatments we were asked to dig into in a little more detail the last time we were all together. So one of the things was crosswalk treatments, and we heard loud and clear that we want our crosswalks to be visible and folks to be paying attention to them. So we brought forward just a handful of recommendations that come with sort of establishing those best practices for how we treat our crosswalks. So longitudinal bar markings are what our standards and guidance tell us is sort of the most visible treatment that you can have in terms of pavement markings to establish a crosswalk. So that's sort of these bars that you're seeing on the page here. Gate posted signs, so actually having a pedestrian crossing sign on both sides. So, if you're blocked by a vehicle or something else going on, you still see that there's a pedestrian crossing by, seeing the sign on the other side of the road. So it's essentially, just posting signs on both sides of the road for that crossing for both directions. Advanced warning signs, there are some, but not every crossing has an advanced warning sign that's appropriate, so making sure that where appropriate, those are in place. Street lighting was something that came up in the last conversation, I think, something to pull forward here, just making sure that those crosswalks, as we're establishing new locations for crosswalks, making sure that those are properly lit. We could add reflective strips on the posts for those pedestrian crossing signs. That certainly helps, especially at night. Just makes it flash for folks with their headlights on it. And then an in-street sign is also another option, especially in this environment where you're sort of in a slow zone downtown. Having a sign that looks like this in the middle of the road, in the middle of the crossing, so that, again, it has that effect of channelizing folks and making folks pay attention and slow down. So
those and they got destroyed.
did they? They got run over?
If you're making the road narrower too,
Yeah.
I'd always.
It in some places it makes a lot of sense, in others, understood that they get run over.
The blinking light at the laundromat seems to work pretty well for help giving people the cue to slow down. And I was just wondering if it would be possible to add more blinking lights.
Yeah, like by the diner.
The state has a regulation on how close you can have those blinking lights, because their theory is if you have too many, it actually distracts, so people tend to.
Okay.
So there's a set distance.
Yeah.
Those lights
Yeah,
are good at night, but not in the day. In the daytime, people drive right through them. They're not large enough. I know they're bright, but they.
Yeah, so
People drive through.
So the RFBs, the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, are a great option, but to your point, we don't want to just have every crosswalk have them. So if there is a particular desire line that sees a lot of pedestrian activity, that's really where we want to concentrate, having that kind of a treatment. And the state really hates blinking things, generally.
I hate to say this, but I've never noticed the blinking light by the laundromat, and I drive through there 4 times.
That's what I mean.
Sorry.
I've seen it a lot. It gets used a lot.
So when you were talking about the crosswalk,
When you push the button.
the bar, the white bars,
Yep.
which we used to have.
Yep.
And then there was a lot of work done in pedestrian safety and a committee of people that worked on that through the planning commission and the select board. And then we tried these red crosswalks. While everything goes away in the winter, because it does, the red has actually been very effective in downtown. It's much more noticeable. And I've noticed it in Newport and many others. So it's also approved, but I need to see us go back to those damn white lines, because nobody sees them.
Yeah.
Well, we could always combine it. That could have a red background with the white lines across it, and then it would be the best of both. But it's obviously, every time we get a 1/4 inch of snow, white lines, it doesn't matter how they're arranged, whereas the red tends to show up a little bit better.
Yeah, and it's not to say that so right now you have transverse lines, the lines that go across on each side of the pedestrian crossing, and then the red imprint in between. those transverse lines are also an approved and fairly effective visual cue.
Only in downtown right now, though.
Yeah, yeah.
It seems like people slow down more. I don't know when I cross it, but yeah. I mean, it's an overall problem.
Yeah,
Slowing down
absolutely,
for crosswalks.
absolutely. And I think, of all of the things, like these other things are going to create that visibility more so and through all of our seasons than, pavement markings, unfortunately. They do disappear in all of the plowing and all of the snow and salt. So I do note here that there's paint treatments, there's also thermoplastic treatments. There's mixed messages about, what the best practice is there. I think they last longer in other climates, not necessarily in Vermont, and they're required to be put in during paving. So it's really sort of a once every 10 or 12 or 15 years, however often they're coming through to do that paving. So for something that you could maintain with more regularity and more affordably, it's really the paint that's the way to go.
I was under the impression that the gate posted signs were the law, but that they were required. Were they not required crosswalks?
You're required to have a crosswalk sign on the approaching side on each side of the crossing. You're not required to have the back side of that sign have exactly.
Gotcha.
Have,
There should be at least,
yes.
the crosswalks we have that don't even have.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha.
But for the price of a sign, where's the harm?
Right,
What you're saying
right.
is the
And
back-
oftentimes you can sandwich them on the same pole,
Right.
so you are just, adding a second sign to an existing pole or to a new pole for both sides.
Thanks.
Yep.
Not with this town manager, but with the previous town manager asking about the crosswalk from the Memorial Park to the electric building. I was told, oh, we can't do that, the signs are too expensive. Now, hopefully that's not the case with the current town manager and select board, but I've heard that here.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the diagram that you're seeing here is how it's required to be posted. So, just on this approach, this sign facing, and on this approach, this sign facing. But we'd sandwich those to have them on both sides so that you can see them both on the left and the right as you're approaching. One more thing in the back, yes?
Just on the advanced warning signs, we have so many crosswalks, I think we
Yeah.
counted 6 or 7. You'd have signs confusing everyone, there'd be so many signs, I don't think you can have.
Yeah, so I think we're thinking is as you're approaching that space where there is sort of a concentration of a number of crossings, making sure we have the advanced warning sign ahead of that first crossing that folks would encounter. And I think on both ends of town, we want to make sure that advanced warning sign is there. But to your point, we wouldn't do it for every crossing. You'd end up with an advanced warning sign on top of an existing pedestrian crossing sign, and we don't want to have too many signs.
Real quick, I think the other half of that is, this would all be great, but our police are not into enforcing crosswalks, and, a lot of people in this town will just blow right through a crosswalk, and they'd rather give a parking ticket, so that has to be part of the discussion in the future. If you're actually trying to make it safer, you have the drivers are the ones that need to be held responsible, not necessarily the
Yep,
pedestrian.
absolutely. All right, another component that we wanted to just have a little bit of a conversation around is the parking wayfinding, really thinking about increasing the utility of the existing parking. Heard that loud and clear. There are some established parking areas with lots of spots that we want to just make sure folks are oriented to as they're coming into town from either direction. So making sure that we're posting that parking, and we highlight too here the bike parking signs for folks that maybe are coming down the hill from the trail and trying to find a place to land their bike so they can pop into a shop and grab a coffee and a sandwich. So making sure that is part of the recommendations here, and pulling forward some of the best practices for establishing that. And then in terms of traffic calming and sort of that transition zone and some of the details that we wanted to pull forward for that area. Certainly the radar speed feedback sign relocation, we discussed that a little bit. There is some guidance around, where to have that, what the placement should be, et cetera. The gateway siding and landscaping to sort of establish that welcoming gateway treatment and just alert folks that they're coming into a place, some of that placemaking. And then the transverse line marking. So
Gateway thing, have we ever thought about rumble strips coming in from the east around the S-curve?
It's a great question. It can be an effective countermeasure. We do have to be careful about where we do rumble strips in proximity to residential use. So there are some clear criteria that we'd have to meet to make sure.
Right in front of the entrance to the old motel, and then with the...
Yeah, and we tend to shy away from the transverse rumble strips, the kind that you would hit before you got to, say, a toll booth. But certainly rumbles are a pretty effective treatment. They tend to be more effective in keeping people in their lane. So you often see them as edge line or center line rumbles to prevent lane departure type crashes. Okay, for the radar speed feedback sign, we do make a recommendation about, again, relocating that to be sort of this side of Glenside, or the approaching side of Glenside Avenue instead of after, as you're coming into the village. Just a couple of things to note on that, making sure that it's open to the air, especially it being solar powered, making sure that it's capturing solar for most hours of the day. So we don't want it next to tree canopy. We do talk about, establishing sort of a tree line, so really making sure we're being strategic about where we're planting trees and where we have that radar speed feedback sign. The other recommendations are mostly around just making sure, again, we don't have too many signs on top of each other. So we're recommending a spacing, I think it ended up being 250 feet between the speed limit sign, the intersection warning sign, and then the radar speed feedback sign. So just making sure those are spaced appropriately for the speed of the roadway. A gateway sign, that you're seeing an example here. This is guidance that VTrans and UVM put together on some of these elements. And so what you're seeing here is a page from that with that gateway sign, this one for Jamaica. But, establishing that gateway sign, having your sort of, welcome to Hardwick and a logo, and, establishing that you're entering a place. And then the transverse line markings. This is a treatment that essentially is line markings that create the visual effect that you're speeding up. So the line markings get closer and closer as you move along the facility, and it gives the visual cue to drivers that they're going faster even though they're going the same speed. And so I pulled forward just the guidance from the MUTCD on how we do that, and we're really recommending this ahead of, as you're approaching town, ahead of the current driveway to the town parcel there, just to have that sort of effect of slowing people down as they're coming through the curve and into that space. And something we can talk to VTrans about, that treatment, and certainly it does exist across the state along state routes. So something that they seem to be amenable to. And then I think this is the last sort of zoom in on additional recommendations. Just thinking about that stormwater treatment opportunity with the realignment of Glenside Avenue, certainly an opportunity with that green space to do some sort of on-site stormwater catchment treatment. And so thinking about potentially a gravel wetland or subsurface infiltration chambers, those steep grades are a constraint, but you could also be pretty effective in capturing a lot of the upslope stormwater that's coming down the hillside there. I know that there's issues in other parts of town with some of those steep slopes and some of the debris that comes downhill as part of that. So really thinking about that and being strategic about that. For that improvement project for the intersection itself, we're thinking about, somewhere in the range of $40,000 to $200,000, depending on the treatment, depending on the catchment area that we want to be treating, but could be adding on that component to sort of deal with the stormwater component. And also, it could open up some other mechanisms for funding because there are some other pots of money that are associated with more of the stormwater treatment and mitigation. So just thinking about being a little creative in how we might make that project happen. All right, I'm happy to jump back to sort of the overarching view of the preferred alternative, but really wanted to open it up for discussion and anything folks want to highlight or talk about in terms of the preferred alternative that we're hoping to carry forward and is already part of our draft scoping report that we are almost ready to turn over for review. So any questions, thoughts, clarifications, feedback on what we're pulling forward in terms of the preferred alternative?
Yep. On that new crosswalk on North Main Street, could you bring that up there?
Certainly. Jump back to the, let's see.
Yeah. I agree that there needs to be a way to cross there, and myself and a lot of people will walk partway up North Main Street and cross where it's a little less busy. Where you're showing it seems like we're leading people into a really hazardous area because the traffic coming from the east isn't required to stop for pedestrians crossing that way, but you're practically sideswiping them.
It's always required to stop for pedestrians.
And trucks
No,
go
no,
by.
no, crosswalk.
So
No,
you're-
you don't come to a stop.
You're thinking on this approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this would continue to be, free flow approaches on
Right.
Mill Street from this side,
Right,
from
and-
South Main Street on this side. What it does do, and with that bulb out, is really establishes where the vehicle needs to be. So you couldn't say if a vehicle is going straight, you couldn't also, simultaneously be making that right, which we have observed at that intersection of folks sort of approaching as if it were a two-lane approach to the intersection from Mill Street. Oh, I should plug it in.
I think cars are gonna creep out over that, because it's gonna be really hard to see around that corner.
But trucks go wide there anyway.
And trucks
Yeah,
go
and-
wide.
And certainly on that approach, the pedestrian crossing is going to be signed as it is today. There is a pedestrian crossing there today, but what this sort of mountable bulb out does help to do is, it gives that visual cue that folks are squeezed and constrained to where they need to be in the intersection as they're approaching.
Can I just ask a clarifying question about the question? So are you concerned about the cars that are coming that are going to be parallel to the people crossing at
Exactly.
that northern?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
So you're
Cars
not
and
worried
trucks
about,
making that
so
curve.
you're,
That's the question.
yeah.
So you're worried about
that
this
they're
movement.
awfully close to where the people are walking.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's the curve right there.
That's true.
And it's a bad spot for a driver coming from the east. Any vehicle that I drive, the column on the front windshield creates a blind spot where it's just an odd circumstance, but you can't see that crosswalk, the second one there around the bend. You have to really kind of look, around the column and see if there's anybody there. And to have I know we need it, but to have those three so close together,
Yeah, it's messy.
it's kind of.
Yeah, and so a couple of things that we're trying to achieve and some constraints that certainly could be figured out in more detail in design, but we are trying to establish this as more of a T intersection, and we want those folks to come in at more of a right angle than they do today. And so really focusing in on where that stop bar ends up so that folks still can see in both directions and be able to have sort of the visual of all of the approaching traffic. and you know, balancing that with where that crossing ends up. So if it does need to come back, we still have some space for that stop bar and that crossing to come back away from sort of the effective edge of the roadway that's sweeping through that curve. So definitely something that we can be working on, that balance point as part of the design.
Yeah, the other bulb out, the one to the south, I think is critical because what encourages people coming off Mill Street to South Main and gunning it, basically coming through that intersection too fast, is that they, especially trucks, swing wide, and they actually leave the travel lane and go into what would be the truck parking. And so I think that constriction will slow people down through there. I agree that perhaps pitching that crosswalk so that it lands near the laundromat farther to the north a little bit is a good idea.
Yeah, that could certainly come up a bit and connect a little further north.
Well, we're talking crosswalks and painting. And I don't, it seems like our crosswalk paint wears out faster than crosswalk paint in other towns. Is that, I don't know if we're using the best paint there is or painting it with the best thing, but is that will part of your recommendations be what paint to use to get the most longevity out of it?
So again, certainly a design detail that we probably won't specify as part of this project in our recommendations, but you know, I hear you. There is a lot of traffic that moves through this corridor, and so some of that is just, you know, there are segments of Route 15 in different villages that see a different level of traffic, and there is a lot of traffic that moves through this corridor. So we have to recognize it takes a lot of abuse. And some of that is just, you know, the maintenance patterns for that particular treatment. And so, you know, that's something that we can make recommendations about budgeting for that, but that is definitely something that needs to be maintained year over year.
Yeah, but maybe it means twice a year painting instead of once a year.
There is like the glass paint that's reflective, but I don't know if you can use that on.
They have been using it.
Have
Yeah.
they? Okay.
Yeah, I've seen them throw it.
I didn't know
Yes.
if you could put that on the road.
Yeah, and it is the recommended treatment, just to make sure that those are visible.
But is ours aren't, though, are they?
They were throwing glass of sand on it when I saw them this summer.
No, it's like a paint.
It's in the.
Yeah,
it's
they
reflective
paint, then they throw it on.
Yeah,
I
but
saw
they
them do
make
it.
like an actual paint that's like
Yeah.
made for this, where you don't have to do that.
The reflective.
I was
Yeah,
wondering
it's
about that
essentially
too.
like
'cause
Oh, you mean
It's
like
like
the
an actual
actual
paint
reflective
itself
paint?
is-
That's
yeah,
different,
yeah.
I think, than
Yeah.
the stuff that has grit and
Yes.
that is also
Yeah.
reflective.
Yeah.
I just want to bring up, I think that this is the second worst intersection in town. I feel like these three crosswalks could actually make it worse. I'm trying to be positive, but I think I'm very concerned with the new one. There definitely needs to be pedestrian crossing there. I don't think that's it. And I think you're going to render that entire street, not usable at certain times of the day, especially after school in the summer. That's going to be really difficult for anybody to use that parking and make that turn. And I almost wonder if you'd be better off, just like as most people said, shifting it up so that where traffic is already backed up and stopped, you have a safe crosswalk that's not in the intersection. And so it would purposefully be, allowing cars to back out, allowing handicap, vehicles to space where they're not waiting on pedestrians. That intersection will already be backed up to the library sometimes during the day. I think this is, with three crosswalks right there, it's likely to make it a lot worse. And it could make it less safe, even if there is crossing, so.
This took one parking space out of that spot already, right?
I think it reoriented a parallel spot, and then
There's a parallel
an
and three spots there.
yeah, and then an
I think
accessible
they took out
spot.
one there.
One at the end and then one at one.
I just wanted to say that this has been identified as a very dangerous stretch of road, and we have had pedestrians hit. So, I mean, I think we are kind of weighting things toward pedestrian safety. And, you know, cars are gonna be fine. Cars are, it's the bodies that are out there in space that don't fare so well. I feel like,
Tracy, I walk, you know, back and forth here all
Yeah,
the time.
yeah.
I never use those crosswalks because I don't want to cross there. The blind spots
Yeah.
coming around the corner, and
we use them
you
almost
can't,
every day.
you know, you have to, I cross them farther back.
Pay attention when you cross them.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it, you know,
You,
someone had
and
an
the lights,
example
people
last
don't stop for the lights.
kid
you
just
know,
going
they
right
blow
through, well, a kid just
Well,
runs through with a phone
I-
every day.
you
So,
can make
so,
a choice.
anyway, but that one
Because that's
across
where we're
from
supposed to cross.
from the inn to
Yeah, you just have
the
to do it
laundromat,
when
that
there's
one's
not
not
one
gonna
of
work.
those cars with no muffler coming.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rob. I walk that all the time. I mean, I live right around the corner. And I always go farther up North Main Street and then cross.
Yeah.
And never cross.
Much-
Well, there's not a crosswalk there now, so you shouldn't be crossing there.
Well,
Yeah.
So there's
I
not
know,
one
but
that
None of us should be crossing there now. There's
Oh,
no
yeah,
crosswalk.
but you know what? If it's safer, you're gonna do it.
I don't go here, and then cross. I go from the co-op up North Main Street and then cross.
But I'll tell you, very rarely do I see people do that and go the extra distance. I see them take their life in their hands and go across. Matter of fact, one time I was watching and I said, okay, you know, because I'm on the planning commission, I'll take pictures and share, you know, document what I see. And I've got a photograph of a woman with a laundry basket and a small child by the hand crossing through there. And there's cars and everything like that. And I said, we need that because people will cross there. And that's the key is if we'll give them as safe a crossing as we can because they are going to cross there. And if people are ignoring it, that's us to talk to the select board to demand that the police are there so that the people who do ignore and blow through makes it very expensive or they lose their license or whatever because you can't design against somebody who's going to break the law.
I think that everybody is right, though, that you're much more visible crossing on Main Street than crossing those two. When I walk from, we live near the Granite Sheds, I'll jaywalk to the parking lot because there's no crosswalk there anymore, stay on that side of the road the entire way to the co-op. So I'm jaywalking right between those two because I don't want to cross at a blind intersection. You can't. You're right, no one can see you come around those corners and, you know, we could get people to go 5 miles an hour. It's still a lack of visibility. So it's, to me, it's much safer that someone sees me coming from an elevated position down the road. There's no way they're gonna miss me. Because, you know, we're at the library, you can see the entire intersection I cross. And I feel a lot safer doing that than crossing the Route 15 3 times to get to the co-op, right? So.
Yeah, we have fun intersections in Hardwick as well.
And the other problem.
Something's
is-
interesting.
Turn around or.
Any other parts of the corridor or components of the preferred alternative that we want to zoom in and
What's the entrances like at the Signo, whatever it was before? Whatever, the co-op owns it now. Where you added the new parking spot?
Richards.
Oh, Richard.
Richards, yeah.
here? So this would be
So what,
a driveway access, a curbed section of sidewalk where that parking spot is, and then another driveway access.
Is it dark, really?
Like, almost like.
no, but they park there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
good,
They're employees.
Could you zoom in on that section?
Yeah, certainly.
So this is my first time being at these meetings,
Sure.
but with that, where A is, has anything been considered about, so there's an old mechanic shop there, and I know Buffalo Mountain Co-op employees park there and everything. Has anything been considered on leveling that location and turning that into public parking?
That I believe is owned, yeah, privately owned.
It's privately owned,
By
but
the
is there any
people
way
that
the
own
town
the
can
bank.
purchase it or something? Because I feel like, personally for me, because I'm a business owner in that area, and I'm finding that this town's growing, it's growing in population, and I feel like if you don't do something to address some kind of public parking, that eventually, people are gonna go to other towns and the businesses there are going to lose customers. We've already lost one restaurant, Vittles, and I know there was a number of different circumstances, but I wonder if there were more parking available, they'd still be here. So, my suggestion was that, I don't know if anyone here owns that location right now. I
Yeah.
apologize.
Oh, yeah, no, it's owned by.
Privately owned.
So it's privately owned.
The
I'm
owner
just-
of the Blue Donkey.
Okay, so I'm wondering whether or not if that were purchased and we were to level that, and that could open up 20 to 30 parking spots. And if you wanted to meter it. But then, it would address the situation with people in the laundromat, if people aren't having to cross in that crosswalk, and they have this on the same side, where they can be on the same side and not cross the road,
Yeah.
that helps that. It's gonna help the hair salon, it's gonna help the hotel, as well as other businesses that's right there in Mill Street. I'm just wondering whether or not that could be considered.
So,
I just don't know if someone owns that, like, I know someone privately owns it, I just don't know if it's anything that's active, because right now, it's zoned as a mechanic shop, is it not, Kristen?
No,
No.
it's now, it was rezoned as a restaurant.
Okay,
The gentleman who owns the former Citgo also owns the bank building.
Right.
He purchased, the bank building lot goes just to the lines of the building itself.
okay,
So the Citgo lot was purchased to provide parking for the
Okay.
bank building.
yeah,
They're owned together. My understanding is the current owner is not interested in separating the two. It is something that is on the town's radar, but at this time, it's privately owned and it's not something we can look into.
okay.
It's all, I mean, we know, it's all the moving parts. We're trying to, this is looking at the pedestrians so that maybe we can encourage people to walk from other areas, you know, it's all a system.
Absolutely.
What
We're
about
trying.
putting parking where you're gonna do the pedestrian path? On the town
You
lot?
can't put parking on that.
Can't.
The way that the funding that came through to buy that lot, to remove, they paid over $125,000 to remove the asbestos buildings on that lot. You just can't, you can't put parking and things like that. It can be recreation, it can be, you know, that sort of thing, but you can do floodplain benching, but you can't create parking.
What about bike parking now?
You can do bike parking, I mean, bike parking isn't, you're not creating, you can put a bike rack, but you can't put pavement or anything of that nature.
Just one more thing, for the way the old Civic Standard was, I know that's probably gonna be demolished at some point because of how close it is to the river. Is there any plan to do anything with that plot of the area, or is it just not safe to do anything with that plot?
If it progresses through the buyout program and receives, and is demolished, and that's a big if, that's not a decided, it would be the same idea where it could not be parking, it could be flood bench. By that token, the Mike Brochu's location, they looked at being in the buyout and decided not to, and they learned that we would have to take out all that parking. So they have done other approaches as they look ahead. But that was part of the conversation with them. So, you know, there's this, again, it's a system. We're trying to do the best we can. We're trying to work with a river that's not always friendly.
Yeah. But there's also, if we ever get the swinging bridge back, there's parking across the way over there, Daniels,
Yeah,
kind of thing. So
Yeah.
there's other parking available if we get that bridge fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of the recommendations out of this are to make sure that, like, as that parking and that connection becomes available again, making sure folks are pointed to that parking early as they're coming into town so they recognize that access. And certainly, you know, pointing folks to the existing parking that is available for folks now, and just making sure folks are aware of those locations.
And then there's the vacant lot not owned by the town where the flood zone was, that would make great parking if it were town owned.
Can I just point out that Joe and Karen came over from the Chittenden County, and it's almost 7. So if we could.
I know
exactly where you're
another
at.
state.
So
Our
they
office
have
is
a
in
long drive
Winooski.
back in the
The
dark.
roads are just getting good.
Also next to a river that doesn't always cooperate.
Yes, I just want us to be aware that this was not originally part of their contract to do a 3rd meeting, but we thought there was enough conversation in the other meetings that we wanted to do a 3rd. And if we can just be cognizant.
This has been really good. Made some really good suggestions.
We're up to 75 people have weighed in.
Yeah, this has been awesome. We appreciate the engagement. It's not every community that we get a good turnout for every public meeting. So no, rather have lots of conversations about it and end up with something that everyone is moving in the same direction on. So. With that, we can stick around and have more conversation and answer more questions. I'm happy to dig into any of the details or follow up after the fact. I will leave you with my email. So if questions bubble up as you walk away from the conversation, certainly we can help to address those. We are planning.
Yep. Oh, Christine, this is the postmaster.
Oh,
Hi.
Hey, I just have one thing about the Sumner Street, if it's off the table for not blocking it off. Could we possibly grade down the pavement and put it back to the original sidewalk that it was? Because the reason that it's so steep right now is because every time it's paved, it just keeps getting higher and higher and higher. So, and there was once a sidewalk there, so why couldn't we just grade it down and put the sidewalk all the way through there? That's my
That would be
take on that.
better than sending people down.
So yeah, and it's a great point and something that came up in the last conversation. I know we had some conversation about the sort of progressive layers of pavement that have been added to that. I do think it probably take something closer to like a full reclamation or a full depth reconstruction of that roadway. Certainly something the town could take on, and if that's something that they're aiming for, that could be an option. I think what we're trying to do in the recommendations out of this particular study is create sort of the connection on both sides of that particular facility, and recognizing that, if we were contemplating a full closure of that, we could be contemplating a full depth reconstruction of that. But it would be a pretty significant project to do either a full depth reconstruction or a full reclamation, to be able to reestablish that sidewalk connection. And perhaps that's part of our narrative around, the future vision of potentially connecting upslope from that location and closing Sumner in a future state. So certainly something we can pull forward in the scoping report and acknowledge that component. But thank you for bringing that up, because it was something that came up in the last conversation about the many layers of pavement that have been added to that particular facility. Any other final questions, thoughts?
Thank you.
So our plan is to be on Zoom for the select board later this month on January 22nd. We are going to carry forward just a short, very brief overview of the process, and then put to the select board a motion to approve the study and carry forward the preferred alternative. And we have put all of that into a draft scoping report that will provide those folks ahead of that meeting. So hopefully we'll be finalizing the scoping report in early February with any final comments or feedback from that body.
The slides will be available on the town's website on the planning pages, or if you can't find them, send me an email and I'm happy to forward them directly to people. So zoning.administrator@hardwickbt.gov.
And I will also leave you with my information just in case, like I said, if questions bubble up as you step away from the conversation. Happy to answer any questions or hear any additional feedback. My email is there. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for being engaged in this process. This was great.